This is LSAT PrepTest 134, Section 4, Passage 3. It's a comparative or dual passage set on evolutionary psychology and altruism. It's a medium difficulty passage. The content's pretty straightforward here, and the trap is a bit subtle. Both authors sound academic, but they are in completely different camps. If you miss that, you're going to get the relationship questions wrong. Now, passage A is pro-evolutionary psychology. Passage B is against it. That is the core dynamic. But passage A is still measured, it's careful, it's almost like it's a textbook. So students will walk away thinking both authors are just exploring the topic. But one of them is exploring and the other is attacking. Now, you want to start with passage A. The first paragraph opens up with a question. How do you explain altruism through evolution? If evolution's about your own reproductive success, why would anyone help anybody else? That is the puzzle. And the author treats it like it's a real puzzle worth solving, not a flaw in the theory. And that framing matters here. The author already trusts evolutionary psychology enough to work within it. The answer shows up right away. They use the word probably lies in. That's the one moment of caution in the entire passage. After that, the author goes all in. Physical resemblance triggers empathy. Empathy leads to helping behavior. Helping behavior spreads the genes that caused it. So each step is building on the last one like a chain. Now, you don't need to memorize the details here. You just got to see that the author presents this chain without ever questioning a single link. The mother who's rushing in to help her child, that's not there to make you feel something, it's there as proof. The author is saying, look, this gene-based explanation accounts for real behavior. That's meant to serve as evidence. Then the end of passage A is the scale up. Small kin groups first, then bigger communities, then the punchline. Behavior that looks altruistic actually comes from a genetically selfish system. And they're using quotation marks around the word selfish for a reason. The author knows the word sounds harsh, but they're not backing away from the idea. They're endorsing it with a little disclaimer. Now, if you read that sentence as the author being skeptical, you've misread the whole passage. Then passage B, first sentence, they say evolutionary psychology is kind of a conspiracy theory. That is not the author being neutral. Of course, they've already made up their mind. The comparison to conspiracy thinking tells you exactly where this is going. The author's argument is that evolutionary psychology explains behavior by inventing hidden motives that the person doesn't even know about. So you might think you love your kid, but actually your genes are just pulling strings. Now, they've got some quiet sarcasm there. They're saying what seemed to be your unsurprising interest is a conspiracy. So the author thinks this is, of course, ridiculous. Then they give you a fair summary of the evolutionary psychology argument. Monogamous families, slow maturing offspring, gene propagation. The author is giving the other side its best case, but that is the setup so they can knock it down later. Now, the question, are they right, is the turn. The author says this kind of reasoning is almost never decisive. You've got to prove that the behavior would only make sense if there were a genetic motive. But helping your kids could be explained by 100 different things. Maybe you care about them. Maybe there's social pressure. Maybe you're just a decent person. So the evolutionary explanation isn't necessarily wrong, but it's also not the only game in town. And it's also not proven. Then the last few sentences land the real blow. Some things you care about just because you care about them. So that right there is a direct rejection of the whole evolutionary psychology project and a direct rejection of everything passage A just built. Now, the key move here, these two passages don't just disagree about whether evolutionary psychology is correct, they disagree about whether its reasoning is even valid. Passage A treats the logic as tight, each step follows from the last. Passage B says the logic has a hole you could drive a truck through. It could never rule out simpler explanations. And the hardest questions will test whether you can see that difference. Now, the main trap here is passage A. It sounds balanced. It uses words like probably and puts selfish in quotes, and so students will read those signals and think the author is hedging or being critical. But those are just academic matters. Being polite, the argument here is fully committed. Now, before you hit the questions, you want to check yourself on three things. First, what specific flaw does passage B identify in the reasoning passage A relies on? Second, when passage B brings up monogamous families, is that support or is it setup? And third, can you state in one plain sentence what each author actually believes? If you can't, you want to go back and reread the last paragraph of each passage, because that's where the authors show their opinions.